All right, well, I think we're ready. Katrina gave us the thumbs up. So we are going to start the part of the program where we're talking about ERB scores. We're going to try to get through this as quickly as we can, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to understand. And so I want to make sure that we spend enough time to help you understand what it is you're looking at when you see these scores. Every time that we do this presentation, I do like to make sure that we start by saying, you know, standardized testing is just a piece of your child's profile. It is not an indicator of what your child is going to eventually do or what they're eventually going to do, where they're going to go to college, where they're going to be successful. It's one piece of their puzzle, and it is a piece that can be influenced by a lot of different things. It can be influenced by their anxiety. It could be influenced by some of the questions. We're going to give you some sample questions of what they see when they take the ERBs. It can be influenced by just having a bad day. It could be influenced by being tired that particular morning. There's so many things that go into standardized testing. What we use it for here at St. Benedict's is to influence our curriculum and to shape what we teach, how we teach, and make sure we are going back and looking at the things that we might need to revisit in teaching. So for us, it's used a lot to shape our curriculum. It is used as a data point for student learning, and I'll show you some examples of what that looks like as we get into the presentation. I think standardized testing does not measure the most important things about your child. I think the things that are on this are the most important things about your student. Their social emotional growth, their creativity, their ability to problem solve and to think critically, their character, their effort, their academic grit. Those are things that this does not measure. And I would argue, as a fan of, not a fan of standardized testing, that this is the most important thing that we can send children out with, are these skills. Because this is what's going to make them successful adults, not the ability to solve a problem on the ERBs. So I argue that this is the most important piece. And I spend a lot of time with the students in the classes that I teach, making sure we're hitting on some of these things, because I think these are the things that give them the life skills and the ability to go out into the world and be influencers. The ERB is what a lot of independent schools in Atlanta use. It's really the only test independent schools in Atlanta use. It is the barometer and the test that a lot of independent schools in Georgia use, and it's an independent school test that's widely used across the country. So it is sort of the one that we choose. It's the one that we use. It is a aptitude-based test as opposed to an achievement-based test. What that means is, like the SAT, like the ACT, you are not regurgitating information. You are not being asked to solve what 2 plus 2 is. You're being asked to know how to go about solving 2 plus 2 and apply that to a problem that is on the ERB. So it's using information that has been taught and applying it so that you can answer questions that come up on these standardized tests. There are tests that are given that are more of the achievement-based, where you are regurgitating information. You are simply repeating back what it is that you have learned. So it's very, very important when you're talking about standardized testing to know what you're talking about, because you can't always compare apples to apples. It doesn't always correlate as a comparison. So when you're looking at the ERB and you're looking at what this test does, it is important to understand what the norm groups are and how they are using this test. We're going to talk about that in a second. 3rd and 4th graders use pencil and paper. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th take the ERB now on their Chromebooks. So it does shift when they get a little bit older. They are able to take it on their Chromebooks. I think some kids really like that. I think that makes them not have to color in circles on a Scantron sheet. I think it keeps them a little bit more focused, but they are working their way in 3rd and 4th to understanding what a standardized test is, understanding how to take a multiple choice test, how to take a test in a timed amount of time, and then as they get older and get more practice with that, we do it on the Chromebook. So about the CTP, these are just some facts about what the CTP5 is. The CTP5 is the battery within the ERB that we use. That is the test itself. I always, when we had a head of school before Brian moved into that position, we had a head of school that did a lot of research on standardized testing, and he would give this presentation and would go into all of the things about norm groups and all the things about stay nines and all of the history that goes into that. And I learned an awful lot. I learned an awful lot that I didn't want to know necessarily, but I learned a lot about it. One of the things I learned is that when you're looking at a standardized test, you do have to know what the norm group is. You have to know what your child is being compared against. You have to know what is the group that they are using to give you the data on your particular student. And when you look at percentiles and stay nines, it can get very, very confusing. And you don't get with these reports who the norm group is that has been used to measure your students' progress. So I think it's really important to understand that when you're taking a lot of the tests, and the reason why you can't do an apple-to-apple comparison is that if this is 100 test takers, and you have 50th percentile, you're in the middle of this right here. The ERB is only normed to the top 20% of students in the country. So it's only normed right here. So when you get a 50th percentile, you're getting a 50th percentile right here, which is very different than a norm group of 50th percentile down here. So that's another reason why you have to be very, very aware of what the norm group is with the test, because a 50th percentile in the top 20th percentile of students who take this test is a very different norm group than the 50th percentile down here. So the ERB is not normed with students that are in an average public school or an average independent school. It is given to the top 20% of students in those public schools. So the student who might drop out at 16 because they can, or the student who has significant learning differences, or the student who is not a high achiever, is not part of the norm group that makes up this test. So when your child is taking the test and they're being given a report, they are being reported against the top performers in the country. So it is a very, very specific test. It is a very, very specific norm group, and it is very rigorous. I mean, it is not an easy test. Each grade has a specific set of subtests, and as you guys know, we spread those out over a week. I'm not going to go into exactly what all the subtests are, but if you look at your student's report, you will see what subtests they had. So third grade has a specific set of subtests. 4 through 8 has a different set of subtests. One of the things that changes between third and fourth is auditory comprehension. And when I have parents come in and ask me about scoring, yes, this means that your children who are not listening at home are probably not listening on this part either. So there is that congruency between you having to tell them things 15 times and the teacher only being able to read the thing one time and them might not hear it. So there is that. So in fourth grade, the auditory does go away and they replace that with the vocabulary. So if you look at your student's set of tests, it will shift a little bit with their age, with their grade. Subtests explained. We said last night we're probably going to send this out to you guys so that you can see what the subtest explanations are, because I think it's very helpful. Oops, did I just turn it off? Very helpful to see the difference between like a verbal reasoning and a vocabulary, or the verbal reasoning and writing. And then it's interesting to see the difference between the two math components. The quantitative reasoning and the math are two separate sections. How do I get to that little pointer? Where? Right there? Oh, the big button in the middle. So this will help you understand exactly what some of the questions are and the differences between some of the language arts and some of the math sections. And we will send this out to you because I think it's helpful for you to be able to see this in context with the scoring. And the norm groups. So when you look at your student's report, you'll see SN, suburban norm. These are suburban public school students who took the test. Again, these are the top 20% of students in those suburban public schools, not the average student in a public school. The grade norm is the GN, that is within St. Benedict. So that's how your student performed against other students here at St. B's. And then you'll see GISA. That is, that's the norm we choose to look at the most. It's the Georgia Independent School Association. So it's other independent schools that make up Georgia. And we tend to focus more on the GISA than we do anything else because we want to see how we are comparing against other independent schools. Stay nines, Angela does a really great job of explaining this. Stay nines are how I choose to look at the the results of your child. I prefer stanines over percentiles. I think anytime that you see percent in a word, you think of it as out of 100. And when you look at a 22nd or a 36th percentile, that's a little scary when you think of it out of 100, and that's not necessarily what it means. So I think stanines are a better way of us helping you understand where your child is performing. So stanine 1 through 3 is the lowest. Stanine 4 through 6 is the mid-range. It's the largest stanine grouping. And then stanine 7 through 9 is the highest level. So we want to see 4s through 9s. That's what we would really like to see. Any questions about it so far? You want to add anything to the stanines? Yes.
This percentile is, which is that?
It's against their grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and you will not see, you'll only see stanines for your own individual child. When we look at groups, it's not ranked in stanines. It's ranked in percentiles for us.
So we can't give you an average stanine for your grade. We have to give you a percentile. And we haven't, I don't think we have that yet. We haven't dug that deep.
I have those reports, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with some questions. I joked last night that I'm going to do the language arts because as a kindergarten teacher, I lost my ability to do math at about 3rd grade. So I can do the language arts piece, but Angela's going to have to do the math piece.
Now you know the answers that you could have really.
Oh, well, maybe. I don't know. I still can't do it. It still gives me, like, anxiety. All right, so verbal reasoning. Here's an example of a question for grade 5. Branch is to tree as engine is to automobile. The relationship suggested by each set of analogies above is best described as A, object to purpose, B, definition to example, C, cause to effect, or D, part to whole. Shout your answer out. Yep, D, part to whole. Some of the children who don't understand analogies might get tripped up by that. So, you know, you have to stop and think about what's an analogy, what am I comparing, and then you can see how they could get lost in some of that. You can also see with this how verbal it is and how much reading is involved. And so if your child struggles in any concept of reading comprehension or reading itself, this is going to be a difficult test for them. Writing concepts and skills for grade 4. Which of the following is the best way of stating the idea? The heat from the fire on the other side of the room can be felt. The heat from the fire can be felt on the other side of the room. On the other side of the room from the fire, you can feel the heat. You can feel the other side of the room, the heat from the fire. So if I'm a 4th grader taking this, and I'm looking at this, I'm gonna be like, wait, what? They're all the same, you know? And I might not have the tenacity to dig through and figure out what that is. And then I might read those to myself because you can't read them out loud. And remember that 4th graders have not yet made that switch from conversational writing to more official or more formal writing. So they're still kind of colloquial. So which do you think the answer to this is? B, that's right. So yeah, so far. You guys are doing great. All right, another English example, verbal reasoning, grade 6. Sylvia notices when her alarm clock goes off in the morning, her dog Spot picks up his food dish with his mouth. She then feeds Spot his breakfast. Sylvia concludes that Spot thinks the alarm means that it's time to eat. Which of the following is the best way to test this conclusion? A, give Spot a different kind of food in the morning and see if Spot picks up the dish. B, wait until Spot picks up his dish in the morning and then set off the alarm clock. C, set the alarm clock off at different times of the day and see if Spot picks up his dish. D, play a different kind of alarm clock each day for a week and then feed Spot. So the first thing I noticed about that question when I read it was it's a lot of words. It's a lot of reading. And it's a lot of just thinking through different scenarios. And if I'm a 6th grader that wants to be done with this test, I might not stay with that question long enough to get to the answer because it's just long. Anybody want to guess at that one? C. And then writing concepts and skills for grade 7. This one is a really great example of how standardized tests are meant to trick you. no matter which one you're talking about, PSAT, SSAT, ACT, any of them are designed to give you multiple correct answers. And then you have to guess which of the correct answers is correct, right? So, which of the following statements from a middle school student would be most likely to convince the school principal to start a drama club? A, lots of kids want to take part in shows when they get to high school, but they don't have a chance until they get real experience in middle school. B, participation in drama clubs has been shown to help students achieve higher grades and increase their self-esteem. C, it is so unfair that everyone talks about sports and music activities and never even thinks about drama, which, can I just say, that's the mentality of a 7th grader? Like, it's just not fair. And then D, wouldn't it be fun to go to a student drama production twice a year and see what middle schoolers can do? A. But it can get tricky. It can get tricky. So I think they would pick B because they think that they want us, they're doing a test, and so they want to talk about high achievement, right? So their mind would go in different places, but the ERB answer is A. So just gives you an example of some of the questions. I'm going to let Angela run you through some of the math.
I know, right? Yeah.
The key prepositional phrase is from.
Okay. A mess with this thing. All right, mathematics, grade 4. The length of each side of the square above is doubled to make a new square. The number of inches in the perimeter of the new square is the concept in A. Concept in B is the number of square inches in the area of the new square. Right now, just looking at the information is confusing. We haven't even gotten to what are you asking me? These are phrases. It's not even complete sentences, right? So which statement is true? A is greater than B is greater than A and B are equal, or there is not enough information to tell which is greater. Sounds like you're not sure, but it is C. Yes, so there's so many things kind of wrong, if you will, with this particular problem. First of all, you don't even know what they're asking until you have looked at the information, right? So you're looking at this information, you're like, what am I supposed to do with it? Doesn't really make sense. It is all about math, and yet you see one number up there, and it's all reading. It's multi-step. You have to know a lot of things in order to solve this. So it's very much an application-based. This is a very high level, but it is 4th grade because they know how to do perimeter and area in 4th grade, and they are expecting that they can easily do this, right? Okay, here's a 6th grade math question, which in all honesty, I think the 6th grade one's easier than the 4th grade one in this example. So we have our points Q, R, and S represent 3 vertices of square QRST. Which pair of coordinates represents point T, the 4th vertex in square QRST above? Some students are going to be like, where is T? Like, T's not even on the grid. It's not, because you need to put it there, although you can't write in the book. And so they have to visualize the T, visualize the square, and then tell us what the coordinate is. The biggest challenge here, look at your choices for answers. If you can't remember, do you go X or Y axis first? Well, you got a 50-50 chance because they're both there. So what do we think this answer is? Yes, C. 5 and 3 go x-axis, y-axis. So again, I mean, could be that I'm actually teaching this right now in pre-algebra. Also, it is a 6th grade skill, but it comes back around in pre-algebra. And I find this one easier than even that 4th grade one. You know, it's a little bit more direct. All right. Okay, so we're going to go through
actual reports, because we know that that's probably what you find kind of the most confusing. I think, Anne, you do a great job of explaining these.
Okay, so you have your child's school report, and this is page 1. So this is a 5th grade school report. And if you remember from our explanations of the norm groups, you've got the suburban public school norm here, you've got the St. Benedict's grade here, you've got the GISA here. So I'm looking at the GISA because that's how we look at it here at St. Benedict's. And I'm looking to see she's done fairly well. So if I look, she's got 2 5s, a 6, 8s, and 9s. Her 2 5s are in math. So, and I know who this is, and I know her student profile is. So I have never seen this student at recess without a book in her hand. Always. Walks around with a book in her hand every single day. Reads voraciously. Loves to sit outside during recess, eat her lunch, book in her hand. And that checks, because all of her verbal is very, very high. Her math is not as high. She is an excellent student. She does very, very well in math. But her reading and her verbal reflects that I see her with a book in her hand all the time. So when I said this is a data point for your student, what we want to do is see if this matches your student's learning profile. That's what I mean, is that we're looking at it to find the commonalities between what we see on her grades, her report cards, and what we see in the classroom when they're learning. So we want to just have this be a piece of the puzzle, but I would not look at this and say she's a bad math student, because she's actually not. She's actually a very, very good math student. She just scores higher in the reading and in the vocabulary because that's where her interests lie. And she spends more time doing that than she spends when she's doing math. I always like to go to page 2 of the report. I think this is the most helpful page of the ERB reports. And I like it because in the middle column, you have the student's percent of mastery. So this is where your student has scored in the percent of mastery on each of these different tests and subtests. So these are the subtests underneath verbal. These are the subtests underneath vocab, reading, writing concepts and skills. This is how the student performed in terms of her mastery. This is how she compares to the mastery of suburban public schools. And this is how she performs to mastery of GISA. So when I'm talking to a parent about their student's progress, I start with this column and I say, okay, let's see how your student compared in mastery to GISA. And where were they close or not at all above? So if you go down this report, this is an example of a student who did obviously very well, and she is scoring in this column significantly higher than GISA, except in this area right here, categorical reasoning. So in this area, the GISA average is 58. Her average of mastery was 33. So I would want to look at that and see, is that what I'm also seeing in the classroom? Is that something that helps me understand how she might be learning or how she's struggling? And the same with the math. So I go over here and I say, okay, 62 is very close to 58. The 60 for extensions and generalizations is really close to 57. Same with the 50 of analysis. So she scored lower on the analysis than the GISA average of 60. So I go through this page and I try to pinpoint areas that I can ask the teacher, are you seeing the same things? Is this making sense? Again, sometimes the answer is no, and you have to go back to, was she tired that day? Did she not sleep well the night before? Was this just too many words on a page and she didn't have the tenacity to stay with it? So all of those things factor in, but I think this is the page that I find the most helpful because I'm wanting to look and see where your child's percent of mastery was, and the specific, to me, it's more informational than looking at this Stay 9, because this doesn't give me details of where they struggled within these different tests. And this slide tells me exactly where we can maybe do some pointed work. if it's consistent with classroom performance. So that, I think, this is the most helpful page. The other pages are just giving that same information in a bar graph. So if you don't like numbers and you like pictures, you can see where the dots, where the diamonds are showing where you're above the independent school norms and where you're below. So it's showing the same information, it's just showing it in a bar graph with a diamond. And the same for the math part. So you can see she significantly scored way outside the independent school mean on reading, but she's more aligned with the independent school mean on math. And then this is the same picture form of that. And then this last page gives historical data. So if your child has taken the ERB more than once, you're going to be able to see how they are performing over time. So sometimes this is helpful for me if there is a radical shift. Like if they have gotten 8s, 9s, 8s, 9s, 8s, 9s the year before, and they come over here and they've got 4s, something's going on. What's happening? That was a really bad test day because that's off. It's just completely off from what her normal performance is. She is pretty much aligned. So she went down 1 here, stayed static here, went down 1 here, went down 2 stay 9s here, went down 1 stay 9 here. And then, of course, auditory comprehension is attested for 4th grade or 5th grade. So she didn't have that test given to her there. So this could give us trends over time and help us, again, dig a little bit deeper into the profile of your child. Does that make sense? But the big part of this, again, and one of the things I shared last night was when I went back and looked at my daughter's ERBs, she was consistently 4s and 5s. I mean, she just did not test well. She had great grades, 4s and 5s in every one of these stay 9s over her entire time she took the ERB. What I knew from that was she's not a great test taker because she can handle the classroom curriculum. So when it came time for her to take the SAT and the ACT for college, we started prepping sooner. So I knew I needed to get her more practice sooner because these tests are not her forte. I also knew that I needed to work with her college counselor to make sure that we highlighted different areas of her so that we could balance the poor test that I thought she was going to have. So I had to work on what can we do to make sure that we're looking at other things and weighing those heavier, make sure that they see those more than what these tests are going to look like. But this did not keep her from getting into high school. She was fine getting into high school, and this does not keep them from getting into college. She scraped together an ACT score after taking it 3 times to get into Georgia Tech, and she's now a 3rd-year student at Tech. So I say that only because, and she's one example, I say that because these scores do not mean that she's not going to be successful, that your child's not going to be successful getting into high school, and it does not mean your child's not going to be successful getting into college. It means you have to understand that this is a piece of the puzzle, and then we look at that in totality as we're talking about other things that involve them, like outplacement. Yeah. They are provided to high schools. The magnet programs that we use in applications, public schools do not take the ERBs, so they don't understand them. So they ask for them just to make sure that we have, in fact, tested children in a standardized way. But they take the PSAT before they get into the magnet programs, and that's the great equalizer amongst all of the public schools. So the PSAT is what they look at for the basis of their decision. And we have prep classes and very intentional outplacement processes to help your child get ready for that. The independent schools use the SSAT. They're very different. They're very similar in the scope of they are both testing things that your children haven't had at the age that they take them. So stupid. But the strategy for each of those tests is different. So the prep for those will help them understand that they actually need to have a different strategy as they're taking those tests. And the strategy is actually more important than the actual knowledge of the test. But they don't get the ERB. We send it, but they don't look at it for magnet. Independent schools do look at it, but I've never had a school say an ERB is keeping a child out of their program. And remember, for the last couple of years, we've had 100% acceptance rates at independent schools across the country for every child who's applied out in independent school. They've gotten into every single one they applied to.
I think that COVID also allowed everybody a whole new look at how important are standardized tests. Colleges had already started to, many colleges don't even take, the SAT and the ACT, and, having those 2 years where nobody gave standardized tests, and kids still got into college, and they got into high school, so I think that it really allowed, maybe not much has changed, but it did allow people to really look at, my favorite quote is, we differentiate our classes all day long from preschool through 12th grade, and then we ask them to take a standardized test to get in. And that's not what our education system is, not standardized anymore. So, I do think that perhaps we made some progress during COVID with the idea of how important are standardized tests. Not everybody has gotten rid of them yet, so we keep doing them. But I think that what's most important is what Ann said, it's one measure. For no matter if it's high school, no matter if it's just outplacement in general, college, whatever it is, standardized testing is just one snapshot. And my daughter is in a very similar boat that Ann's daughter was in, does great in class, grades, excellent, taking all the courses, pre-algebra, algebra, getting A's, doesn't test well in the math portion, but those grades are more important, so. Teacher recs, all of that, yeah.
Way more higher than,
Yep.
have a higher weight than those test scores.
Questions, other questions? This is not the actual order, not the exact order. It's similar, but we actually did quantitative reasoning and math on different days this year because though all in one day is a lot. I think most students would tell you quantitative reasoning is the hardest one. And there's a lot of application and critical thinking involved in that. So that was, math 1 and 2 was the last day, but we paired quantitative reasoning, I think, this year with one of the writing components. What we look at is the times that they take, right? So we just try to balance that.
We don't want them testing all day. So we want them to test for a short part of the day and extend it out across the week.
Other
Any
questions?
Other questions?
It all starts in third grade,
Does, yes.
so if you've got third graders, you're worried about it, just don't worry about it, just probably improve over time.
We don't actually want you to worry about it at all. Come talk to us so if you're worried about it, yeah.
I think what's important to know is it's really, if it's a snapshot for your child, it's also a snapshot for our grade. And if there are things that we need to work on, it lets us know that. Or there are things that we need to review because they're that far ahead. Or there's a decision we've made with our curriculum that we know we're not covering that certain area, so we expect that to be low. Tell your child it's more about your teacher and the school than it is about you.
Yep.
So when they wake up nervous, the only thing they should be nervous about is, can I sit still for that long?
If they want to know, sure. Absolutely, I mean, you can. Want to know, sure. Absolutely, I mean, you can. What I would be careful of, you may want to just stay 9, because if they know how old they are, they see that they're in the 35th percentile, they're going to have failed. No matter what. I mean, anything, 50 and below, they're going to think that no matter what you say. So if you have a young 3rd, 4th, even 5th, you may want to just say, your stay 9 was this on this type of scale, right?
I used to try to say it to them as, because I even think that if you look at a 5, they're going to know that that's, and my daughter was always harder on herself than I could have ever been on her. So for her, I said, well, your math isn't as strong as your reading. Something we got to work on, And so I tried to frame it like that with them rather than actually actually putting the report in front of them. I think it's a lot for us as adults, and it's a lot to take our anxiety down as moms and dads when we're looking at these things. So I think when you're trying to take their anxiety down, they're going to feel some of like what you're feeling about it. And so I always just try to frame it for her as, well, you did great reading, you know, that math is still kind of your trick spot. So we kind of went back and forth on it.
You can also associate words, you know, you scored, you know, in an above average category, or, you know, your math was average. So that's up to y'all, you know, how you would want to.
When they do get the PSATs back and the SSATs back, they start talking about it and they start understanding it then. And then I do think they put pressure on themselves. Like I do think they compare themselves to each other, and they start to naturally do that. So I try to keep that bubble as long as I possibly can, because it comes soon enough. And that comparison can really get them when, you know, they're trying so hard and their scores don't always show that. So, but that's me. I'll always look after their hearts, you know, and their feelings when it comes to those things, because I really do know at the end of the day, whether it's the PSAT, the SAT, the SSAT, or the ERBs, it isn't going to make that much difference. It's not going to keep a child out. What it does do in college is it qualifies them for the Zell or the Hope Scholarship. That's where it matters. But in terms of getting into a school, you know, you have to, it varies every year what that looks like. You know, I told the story to a friend last night that when my daughter was applying to schools, she scraped together her ACT and she got in with, you know, Georgia and Georgia Tech. But then the next year, her good friend who had higher ACTs than she did and had lower grades than she did not get into Georgia. He had a higher ACT. I mean, he aced the ACT, and he didn't get in. His grades were pretty much equivalent, a little bit lower, but not much. So you never know what's going to cause all of that, and it's a hard thing to try to understand. But I just try to keep it as vague as I can with them.
Another flip on that, I've got a son who's dyslexic, and we never showed him scores because he didn't need any more reinforcement. He wasn't smart, and he makes straight A's in high school. We knew we were going to need to get extra help for the ACT. Spent thousands of dollars. He didn't move up barely, and he goes, "Well, I guess I'm not going to go to Tech." I go, "Not in the first 2 years. You're going to save us a lot of money, but you're going to get into Tech if you go to Kennesaw State, do their program for Tech. You're going to get in because you want to." He's got grit. I mean, the kid is, he'll sit down and work until he gets mad. So that's just another, you know, that's his secret. That's a superpower, is what I tell him. You're dyslexic. You'll come in underneath the radar. They're not going to see you coming, and then boom, we got a smart kid in the class.
Thank you guys. We're always available if you have specific questions and you want to go through it with us individually. Either one of us are happy to go through